The desert wind carried more than sand that morning. It carried the weight of a mission that would test every limit of human endurance, brotherhood, and survival. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hawk Morrison pressed his eye to the scope of his rifle, scanning the rocky terrain that stretched endlessly before his six-man SEAL team. The Afghan mountains loomed like ancient guardians, their peaks shrouded in morning mist that would soon burn away under the relentless sun. "Movement 2 clicks northeast," whispered Petty Officer First Class Miguel Ghost Ramirez through the comm system. His voice was barely audible, a skill perfected through countless operations where silence meant the difference between life and death. Ghost had earned his nickname not just for his ability to move unseen, but for his uncanny talent of appearing exactly where he was needed most. Hawk adjusted his position behind the weathered boulder that had become their temporary observation post. The intelligence reports had been clear. A high-value target was moving through this region, someone important enough to warrant sending one of the Navy's most elite teams deep into Taliban-controlled territory. But intelligence reports Hawk knew from experience were often as reliable as weather forecasts in a hurricane. "I see them," confirmed Seaman Marcus Tech Williams, the team's communications specialist and the youngest member of the squad at 24. Despite his youth, Tech had proven himself invaluable on previous deployments. His fingers danced across the encrypted radio equipment with the same precision a pianist might use on ivory keys. Convoy of 3 vehicles, armed escorts visible. The team had been in position for 18 hours, having moved under cover of darkness across terrain that would challenge even experienced mountain climbers. Each man carried nearly 80 pounds of equipment, weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, communication gear, and enough food and water for a 3-day operation. The weight was distributed with military precision, every ounce accounted for and justified. Senior Chief Petty Officer David Rock Thompson, the team's medic and second-in-command, shifted slightly to get a better view through his binoculars. At 38, Rock was the oldest member of the team and had more combat deployments than the rest combined. His weathered face told stories of conflicts across 3 different continents, each line earned through experiences that civilian life could never provide. "Positive identification on the target," Rock reported, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had been in similar situations dozens of times. "Hassan Mahmoud confirmed. He's in the second vehicle, passenger side." Hassan Mahmoud was more than just another name on a target list. He was the architect of several devastating attacks on coalition forces, a man whose tactical brilliance had made him one of the most wanted insurgent leaders in the region. His capture would potentially save hundreds of lives and deal a significant blow to the Taliban's operational capabilities in the province. Petty Officer Second Class Anthony Breacher Davis checked his explosive charges for the 3rd time in the past hour. The demolitions expert's meticulous nature had saved their lives on more than one occasion, and his attention to detail was legendary even among the precision-focused SEAL community. "Charges ready," he reported quietly. "Can take out the lead vehicle on command." The 6th member of the team, Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Overwatch Kelly, occupied a position 300 meters higher up the mountainside. As the team's designated marksman, his role was to provide cover and eliminate threats from a distance. Through his high-powered scope, he could see details that were invisible to the others below. "I count 12 tangos total," Overwatch reported. 4 in each of the first 2 vehicles, 3 in the trail vehicle plus the driver. Standard AK-47s visible, possible RPGs in the bed of the pickup. The convoy was moving slowly along the winding mountain road, following a route that intelligence suggested Hassan used regularly when traveling between safe houses. The road itself was little more than a dirt track carved into the mountainside generations ago, wide enough for a single vehicle in most places. Hawk made rapid calculations in his mind, considering wind speed, distance, terrain advantages, and the dozen other factors that could determine the success or failure of their mission. The plan was relatively straightforward. Disable the lead vehicle with explosive charges, capture Hassan alive if possible, and extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. "All stations, this is Hawk," he transmitted to his team. "Initiate on my mark. Remember, we need Hassan breathing. Everyone else is fair game if they present a threat." The convoy continued its slow progress along the mountain road, unaware that 6 of America's elite warriors were tracking their every move. The morning sun climbed higher, beginning to burn off the mist and creating the kind of harsh shadows that could either conceal a SEAL team or expose them to enemy fire. Tech monitored multiple radio frequencies, listening for any indication that their presence had been detected, or that additional enemy forces might be moving in their direction. His equipment could intercept and decode most of the communication methods used by insurgent forces in the region, providing the team with valuable intelligence about enemy movements and intentions. Clean frequencies, Tech reported. No chatter indicating they know we're here. The lead vehicle in the convoy hit a pothole, causing it to bounce heavily and slow down even further. Inside that vehicle, Hawk knew, were 4 armed men, whose only job was to die protecting Hassan Mahmoud if necessary. The trail vehicle carried 3 more fighters, all veterans of the ongoing conflict who had survived numerous battles against coalition forces. Ghost had moved position twice in the past 10 minutes, each time finding better concealment while maintaining his ability to quickly close distance with the target vehicles. His movement was so fluid and silent that even his own teammates sometimes lost track of his exact location until he reported in over the radio. "Ghost is in position Alpha," he whispered. Clear shot at the driver of the second vehicle if needed. Roth checked his medical supplies one final time. In addition to his combat role, he was responsible for keeping the team healthy and treating any wounds they might sustain during the operation. His pack contained everything from basic bandages to emergency surgery equipment, all designed for use in combat conditions. The convoy rounded a bend in the road, bringing it into the optimal position for the ambush. The lead vehicle would hit Breacher's explosive charge in approximately 30 seconds, assuming they maintained their current speed. The second vehicle, carrying Hassan, would then be trapped between the disabled lead vehicle and the trail vehicle, exactly where the SEAL team wanted them. 15 seconds to initiation, Hawk announced quietly. Each team member made final adjustments to their equipment and positions. Years of training and combat experience had taught them that the moments immediately before contact were often the most critical. Equipment malfunctions, communication failures, or simple bad luck could turn a perfectly planned operation into a disaster. The lead vehicle approached the predetermined point where Breacher had carefully placed his charges the night before. The explosives were designed to disable the vehicle without necessarily killing the occupants. The SEAL team needed prisoners for interrogation, and dead men provided no intelligence. 10 seconds. Overwatch made minute adjustments to his scope, compensating for the slight crosswind that had picked up as the morning progressed. His rifle was zeroed for this exact range and conditions, and he had already selected his primary and secondary targets among the visible insurgents. 5 seconds. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the ever-present wind seemed to pause as 6 elite warriors prepared to execute a mission that had been planned in detail over the course of several weeks. Intelligence analysts, mission planners, weather experts, and logistics specialists had all contributed to getting this team to this exact place at this exact moment. The lead vehicle's front wheel crossed the invisible line that marked the trigger point for Breacher's charges. In that instant, everything changed. The explosion shattered the morning silence like thunder, sending a column of dirt and debris high into the air. The lead vehicle lurched violently to the left. Its front axle shattered and both front tires shredded. Steam poured from its ruptured radiator as the engine died with a grinding mechanical scream. The second vehicle, Hassan's vehicle, braked hard to avoid colliding with the disabled lead vehicle. The driver's training kicked in immediately that the mountain road was narrow and the trail vehicle was too close behind for a rapid escape. Tango down. Lead vehicle disabled. Breacher reported with satisfaction. His charges had performed exactly as planned, disabling the vehicle without causing the massive explosion that might have killed everyone inside. The insurgents in all 3 vehicles reacted with the speed and aggression of experienced fighters. AK-47s appeared at windows and doors as they prepared to fight their way out of the ambush. The morning air filled with the metallic sounds of weapons being chambered and safeties being released. Hawk's rifle spoke first. A single precise shot that shattered the rear window of Hassan's vehicle and struck the fighter who was attempting to provide cover fire from that position. The man slumped forward, his weapon falling to the floor of the vehicle as his body went limp. Ghost materialized from behind a cluster of rocks that had seemed too small to conceal a man, his own weapon already aimed at the driver of the second vehicle. His shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him around in his seat and causing him to lose control of the steering wheel. The trail vehicle's occupants had jumped out and were using their vehicle for cover while returning fire in the general direction of the SEAL positions. Their shots were poorly aimed, fired more in desperation than with any tactical precision, but stray bullets could kill just as effectively as well-aimed ones. Rock's position gave him a clear view of the entire ambush site. He methodically engaged targets with the calm precision that had made him legendary among SEAL snipers. Each shot was carefully aimed and deliberately fired, conserving ammunition while maximizing the psychological impact on the surviving insurgents. Hassan is mobile, Overwatch reported from his elevated position. He's moving toward the rear of his vehicle, possibly trying to reach the trail vehicle. Tech maintained constant communication with their extraction helicopter, which was orbiting at a safe distance several miles away. The pilot needed regular updates on the team's status and the expected duration of the engagement to plan the pickup and coordinate with any supporting aircraft that might be needed. The battle raged for what seemed like hours but lasted only minutes. The insurgents fought with the desperation of men who knew they were trapped and outnumbered by superior forces. Their return fire was intense but largely ineffective, spraying bullets across the rocky landscape without hitting any of the concealed SEAL positions. One of the insurgents from the trail vehicle attempted to flank the SEAL positions by moving up the mountainside. He made it perhaps 50 meters before Overwatch's rifle found him, ending his flanking maneuver with surgical precision. The man's body tumbled back down the slope, serving as a grim reminder to his surviving comrades about the futility of their situation. Breacher moved forward under covering fire from his teammates, using the terrain and his explosive charges to systematically eliminate the insurgents' defensive positions. His approach was methodical and professional, each movement calculated to bring him closer to the target vehicles, while minimizing his exposure to enemy fire. The driver of Hassan's vehicle was badly wounded but still conscious, his blood spattering the interior of the vehicle as he struggled to reload his weapon with his one functioning arm. Ghost appeared at the passenger side window like a vengeful spirit, his weapon aimed directly at the man's head. "Drop it," Ghost commanded in heavily accented Pashto. The driver looked into Ghost's eyes and saw his own death reflected there. The weapon fell from nerveless fingers as the fight went out of the wounded man. Hassan Mahmoud had managed to reach the rear of his vehicle and was attempting to crawl toward the cover provided by the trail vehicle. His expensive clothing was torn and dirty, his carefully groomed appearance destroyed by the violence of the ambush. For a man accustomed to commanding respect through fear and intimidation, the experience of being hunted was both terrifying and humiliating. Rock moved to flank the remaining insurgents at the trail vehicle, his medical training allowing him to assess their wounds and determine which ones were still capable of fighting effectively. 2 were already dead, their bodies sprawled in unnatural positions beside their vehicle. The 3rd was wounded but still dangerous, his eyes darting back and forth as he looked for an opportunity to escape or strike back. The engagement was entering its final phase. Most of the insurgents were dead or seriously wounded, and Hassan was almost within reach of capture. The SEAL team had executed their plan with textbook precision, adapting to changing conditions while maintaining their tactical advantage throughout the brief but intense firefight. Hawk moved toward Hassan's position, his weapon trained on the high-value target while his eyes scanned for any remaining threats. Years of combat experience had taught him that the most dangerous moments in any engagement were often when the enemy appeared to be defeated. Desperate men were capable of desperate acts, and Hassan Mahmoud had not survived this long by accepting defeat easily. The insurgent leader had reached the cover provided by the trail vehicle and was attempting to retrieve a weapon from one of his dead bodyguards. His hands shook with adrenaline and fear as he fumbled with the unfamiliar AK-47, trying to chamber a round while keeping an eye on the advancing SEAL operators. "Hassan Mahmoud," Hawk called out in Arabic, using the formal tone that conveyed both authority and respect. "You are surrounded. Surrender now and you will not be harmed." The response came not in words but in the form of wildly aimed automatic weapons fire as Hassan sprayed bullets in the general direction of Hawk's voice. The shots went wide, striking rocks and empty air, but they demonstrated that the insurgent leader was far from ready to surrender. Tech had been monitoring enemy radio frequencies throughout the engagement, and his equipment suddenly crackled to life with urgent transmissions in Pashto. His translation skills were good enough to understand the general meaning, and what he heard made his blood run cold. "Hawk, we've got company coming," Tech reported urgently. "Multiple enemy units converging on our position." ETA approximately 15 minutes. The situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. What had been planned as a quick capture operation was about to become a running battle against superior numbers in terrain that favored the enemy. The SEAL team needed to secure Hassan and get to their extraction point quickly, or they would find themselves fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Hassan seemed to sense that help was coming. His wild firing ceased, and he attempted to make himself as small a target as possible while waiting for his reinforcements to arrive. The insurgent leader was no coward. He had survived numerous attempts on his life and had personally led attacks against coalition forces, but he was also smart enough to know when discretion was the better part of valor. The remaining insurgent at the trail vehicle chose that moment to make his final stand. Badly wounded and knowing that capture meant lengthy interrogation, followed by execution or life imprisonment, he gathered his remaining strength and charged toward Rock's position, firing his weapon as he ran. Rock's response was instantaneous and lethal. His rifle bucked once against his shoulder, and the charging insurgent crumpled to the ground, his weapon falling silent as his body went limp. The mountainside fell quiet, except for the sound of the wind and the distant rumble of approaching vehicles. Ghost had reached Hassan's position and was attempting to flush him out from behind the trail vehicle. The insurgent leader was proving to be more resourceful than expected, using the terrain and the cover provided by his dead bodyguards to avoid capture while buying time for his reinforcements to arrive. "I can hear engines," Overwatch reported from his elevated position. "Multiple vehicles, approaching from the east. Estimate 4 to 6 trucks probably carrying 20 to 30 fighters." The SEAL team was about to face a classic military dilemma: complete their primary mission of capturing Hassan Mahmoud, or abort the operation to ensure their own survival. The approaching enemy force would outnumber them by at least 4 to 1, and the terrain offered limited options for escape or extended defense. Hawk made the decision that would define the rest of the operation and possibly determine whether his team lived or died. "We complete the mission," he announced over the radio. "Ghost, take Hassan alive. Everyone else, prepare for defensive positions. We hold until extraction arrives." The words had barely left his mouth when the first of the approaching enemy vehicles appeared on the mountain road below their position. The truck was loaded with armed fighters, their weapons already trained on the area where the ambush had taken place. More vehicles appeared behind the first, creating a convoy of death that would soon turn the SEAL team's successful ambush into a desperate battle for survival. Hassan Mahmoud heard the approaching engines and renewed his resistance, knowing that rescue was only minutes away. He had managed to arm himself with a pistol taken from one of his dead bodyguards, and he was prepared to use it to buy the few additional minutes his reinforcements needed to reach the ambush site. The morning sun had climbed higher during the engagement, burning off the last of the mist and creating the harsh, shadowless light that made concealment difficult and accurate shooting challenging. The SEAL team would need every advantage they could find if they hoped to survive the next phase of their operation. Rock moved to establish a defensive position that would cover the most likely approaches the enemy reinforcements would use. His medical training had taught him to think systematically about problems, and he applied that same methodical approach to combat situations. Every piece of cover, every angle of approach, every potential weakness in their position was carefully evaluated and accounted for. Tech worked frantically to establish communication with their extraction helicopter, knowing that the team would need immediate pickup once Hassan was secured. The pilot was already aware of the developing situation and was calculating approach routes that would minimize his exposure to enemy fire, while still allowing him to reach the SEAL team. Breacher prepared additional charges that could be used to delay the approaching enemy forces or to create an escape route if the team's position became untenable. His explosive devices could turn the narrow mountain road into an impassable obstacle, but only if he could get close enough to emplace them before the enemy trucks arrived. The sound of gunfire echoed off the mountain walls as the first enemy reinforcements reached the ambush site and began to assess the situation. Their initial response was cautious, the result of hard-earned experience fighting against coalition forces who possessed superior training and equipment. But caution would only last so long. Once they realized they were facing a small team rather than a large unit, The insurgents would press their numerical advantage and attempt to overwhelm the SEAL positions through sheer weight of numbers. Hassan Mahmud was about to become either the prize that justified the risks the SEAL team had taken or the cause of their destruction in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. The next few minutes would determine which outcome would be written into the mission reports that would eventually reach the highest levels of military command. The battle for Hassan Mahmud's life and freedom was about to enter its deadliest phase, and 6 elite American warriors prepared to face odds that would test every limit of their training, courage, and brotherhood. The first enemy truck rounded the bend in the mountain road with its engine roaring and black smoke pouring from its exhaust pipe. The vehicle was an old Soviet-era military transport that had seen decades of warfare, its metal body scarred by bullet holes and rust, but still functional enough to carry 12 armed fighters into battle. Ghost made his move while the enemy reinforcements were still assessing the situation. He appeared behind Hassan like a shadow-given form, his rifle barrel pressed against the insurgent leader's neck before the man even realized he was no longer alone. "Move and die," Ghost whispered in perfect Pashto, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had killed many men and felt no remorse about adding another to that list. Hassan Mahmud froze, his finger still on the trigger of the pistol he had taken from his dead bodyguard. The insurgent leader was many things: brutal, cunning, ruthless in his pursuit of power. But he was not stupid. The cold metal pressed against his spine told him everything he needed to know about his situation. "Drop the weapon," Ghost commanded, increasing the pressure of his rifle barrel against Hassan's vertebrae. Slowly, the pistol fell from nerveless fingers, clattering against the rocky ground with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire mountainside. Hassan raised his hands slowly, his expensive watch catching the morning sunlight, as he surrendered to the American Special Operations soldier who had materialized from nowhere. Hawk watched the capture through his rifle scope, while simultaneously tracking the movements of the approaching enemy convoy. The first truck had stopped approximately 200 meters from the ambush site, its occupants clearly visible as they dismounted and began to establish defensive positions of their own. "Package secured," Ghost reported over the radio, using the code word that indicated Hassan Mahmud was now in custody, ready for extraction. But extraction was going to be complicated. The enemy convoy had grown to include 6 vehicles carrying what appeared to be at least 40 armed fighters. More vehicles could be heard approaching from multiple directions, suggesting that Hassan's capture had triggered a coordinated response from insurgent forces throughout the region. Rock had found a position among a cluster of boulders that provided excellent fields of fire while offering protection from most angles of attack. His rifle was already zeroed for the ranges he would be engaging, and he had calculated how much ammunition he would need to hold his sector until the extraction helicopter arrived. "Multiple tangos dismounting," Rock reported calmly. "They're spreading out, trying to flank our positions. Estimate 40-plus fighters. Probably more coming." Tech's radio equipment crackled with intercepted enemy communications as insurgent commanders attempted to coordinate their response to the American presence. His translation revealed that additional forces were being diverted from other operations, turning what had been a simple capture mission into a potential battle involving hundreds of enemy fighters. "They're calling in everything they have," Tech reported grimly. "Air assets, mortars, even some kind of vehicle-mounted heavy weapons. They really want Hassan back." The importance of Hassan Mahmud to the insurgent cause was becoming clear through the massive response his capture had generated. Coalition intelligence had suspected he was a key figure in the Taliban hierarchy, but the willingness of enemy forces to risk so much to rescue him suggested his value was even greater than originally estimated. Breacher had moved to a position where he could observe the mountain road and potentially interdict enemy reinforcements with his remaining explosive charges. The narrow confines of the road made it an ideal location for demolitions work, but he would need to time his attacks perfectly to maximize their effectiveness. Overwatch maintained his elevated position, using his scope to track enemy movements and provide early warning about flanking attempts or the arrival of additional hostile forces. His vantage point gave him a commanding view of the entire battlefield, but it also made him vulnerable to counter-sniper operations if the enemy had marksmen of their own. "I see movement on the ridgeline," Overwatch reported. "Looks like they're trying to get snipers into position to neutralize our Overwatch capability." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The SEAL team had accomplished their primary mission by capturing Hassan Mahmoud, but they were now trapped in a defensive position against overwhelming odds with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect of extraction. Ghost had flex-cuffed Hassan and positioned him behind the relative cover of the disabled vehicle, where the insurgent leader would be protected from his own force's gunfire while remaining under constant guard. Hassan's eyes darted back and forth as he assessed his situation, clearly calculating the odds of escape or rescue. "Your men are coming," Hassan said in accented English, speaking directly to Ghost for the first time. "Many men. You cannot escape." And Ghost's response was a slight smile that never reached his eyes. "We'll see about that," he replied, checking his weapon and ammunition supply while keeping one eye on his prisoner. The enemy fighters had spread out across the rocky terrain, using their superior numbers to establish multiple firing positions while avoiding presenting concentrated targets for the SEAL team's precision weapons. Their tactics were sound, the result of years of experience fighting against better-equipped coalition forces. Hawk made rapid calculations about ammunition expenditure, extraction times, and the defensive capabilities of his team's position. The mathematics were not encouraging. Even with perfect accuracy and no equipment failures, they would be hard-pressed to hold their position long enough for helicopter extraction. "Tech, get me a priority channel to base," Hawk ordered. "We need immediate air support and emergency extraction. Our situation is about to go from bad to worse." Tech's fingers flew across his communication equipment, establishing the encrypted connection that would allow Hawk to speak directly with their operational commanders. The transmission had to penetrate electronic jamming attempts by enemy forces while maintaining perfect clarity despite the chaos of the developing battle. "Overlord, this is Hawk," he transmitted when the connection was established. "Package secured, but we are surrounded by superior forces. Request immediate air support and emergency extraction at Grid Romeo 7-4. The response crackled through the radio with military efficiency. "Hawk, this is Overlord. Air support is 40 minutes out. Extraction helicopter is 25 minutes from your position. Can you hold?" 25 minutes might as well have been 25 hours given their current situation. The enemy forces were already beginning to probe their defensive positions, sending small groups of fighters to test the SEAL team's response times and identify weaknesses that could be exploited in a full assault. Rock's rifle spoke twice in rapid succession, dropping two insurgents who had attempted to advance using a dry creek bed for concealment. His shots were precise and economical, each bullet finding its intended target without waste. But for every enemy fighter he eliminated, two more seemed to take their place. "They're massing for an assault," Rock observed, tracking additional movement through his rifle scope. "I count at least 20 fighters moving up the eastern approach, maybe more using the dead ground to stay hidden." Breacher had identified the perfect location for his remaining charges, a narrow section of the mountain road where a well-placed explosion could trigger a rock slide that would block enemy reinforcements. But reaching that position would require him to expose himself to enemy fire for at least 30 seconds, an eternity in combat conditions. "I can block their reinforcements," Breacher reported, "but I'll need covering fire to reach the detonation point." Ghost looked down at Hassan Mahmoud, who was listening to every word of the SEAL team's tactical discussions with obvious interest. The insurgent leader was already formulating plans based on what he was hearing, calculating how he might use the information to facilitate his escape or rescue. "Maybe we should gag our guest," Ghost suggested, noticing Hassan's intense attention to their communications. The sound of mortar rounds being fired echoed across the mountain valley, the distinctive thump-thump-thump that every experienced combat soldier recognized immediately. The enemy forces had brought indirect fire weapons into the battle, exponentially increasing the danger to the trapped SEAL team. "Incoming mortars," Overwatch announced with practiced calm. "Impact in approximately 30 seconds, targeting our general position." The team immediately sought whatever cover they could find among the rocky terrain, pressing themselves against boulders and into crevices that might provide protection from the explosive rounds. Hassan was dragged unceremoniously into the best available shelter, his value as an intelligence asset temporarily outweighing any concerns about his comfort. The first mortar rounds impacted with tremendous explosions that sent razor-sharp rock fragments flying in all directions. The insurgent mortar crews were skilled, walking their fire across the SEAL team's suspected positions with methodical precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. Dust and debris filled the air, making it difficult to see more than a few meters in any direction. The acrid smell of high explosives mixed with the cordite from weapons fire, creating an atmosphere that burned the lungs and stung the eyes of everyone in the impact area. Tech's radio equipment had been damaged by rock fragments from the mortar barrage, forcing him to switch to backup systems while attempting repairs to his primary communication gear. Maintaining contact with their extraction helicopter and air support was critical to their survival, making his equipment more valuable than weapons in their current situation. Comms are degraded but functional, Tech reported, blood running down his face from a cut caused by flying debris. I can maintain contact, but signal strength is reduced. Hawk assessed the damage to his team and their equipment, while enemy small arms fire began to impact around their positions. The mortar barrage had been designed to soften their defenses and force them to keep their heads down while insurgent assault teams moved closer to their positions. Ghost had shielded Hassan from the worst of the mortar impacts, not out of any concern for the insurgent leader's welfare, but because a dead prisoner was worthless for intelligence purposes. Hassan had a cut on his forehead, and his expensive clothing was now thoroughly destroyed, but he remained conscious and apparently uninjured. You see, Hassan said, speaking loudly enough to be heard over the continuing explosions, my men are very determined. Perhaps we can make arrangement, yes? Ghost's response was to press the barrel of his sidearm against Hassan's temple. The only arrangement involves you staying alive long enough to tell us what we want to know, he replied coldly. Rock had identified the enemy mortar position using the backflash from their weapons, and he was attempting to engage the crew with precision rifle fire at extreme range. The distance was at the very limit of his weapon's effective range, requiring him to compensate for wind, elevation, and the movement of targets he could barely see through his scope. His first shot missed, kicking up a spray of dirt several meters to the left of the mortar position. Rock made minute adjustments to his aim, compensating for the crosswind that had picked up as the morning progressed. His second shot was closer, causing the enemy mortar crew to pause their firing and seek cover. Breacher had used the confusion caused by the mortar barrage to advance toward his target position on the mountain road. He moved in short rushes between available cover, each movement timed to coincide with periods when enemy attention was focused elsewhere. The explosive charges he carried were specifically designed for this type of operation, powerful enough to trigger a significant rock slide, but compact enough to be carried and emplaced by a single operator. Once detonated, they would effectively seal the mountain road against vehicular traffic for days or even weeks. Breacher is in position, he reported over the radio. Ready to blow the road on your command. Overwatch had spotted the enemy snipers who were attempting to establish firing positions on the opposite ridgeline. The range was extreme even for his precision rifle, but the threat they posed to the rest of the team made engaging them a priority despite the difficult shot. His rifle fired once, the sound echoing off the mountain walls like thunder. Through his scope, he saw one of the enemy snipers spin and fall, his weapon tumbling down the rocky slope as his body went limp. The remaining enemy marksmen immediately sought better cover, their attempt to establish Overwatch positions temporarily disrupted. One Tango sniper down, Overwatch reported with satisfaction. The others have gone to ground, but they're still up there. Tech had managed to repair his primary communication system and was coordinating with the incoming air support and extraction helicopter. The pilots needed precise information about enemy positions, friendly locations, and the best approach routes to minimize their exposure to ground fire. Overlord, this is Hawk, he transmitted. We are taking heavy fire from approximately 60 insurgents with mortar support. Immediate air support required at Grid Romeo 7-4. Danger close authorization granted. The response was immediate and reassuring. Hawk, this is Viper 1-1, 2 minutes out with full ordnance load. Mark your positions with smoke and keep your heads down. Air support in the form of an A-10 Warthog was approaching their position, carrying enough firepower to turn the tide of the battle in the SEAL team's favor. But calling in close air support in mountainous terrain required precise coordination to avoid friendly fire incidents that could be as deadly as enemy action. Ghost popped a smoke grenade and threw it to mark the team's position for the incoming aircraft. The bright orange smoke billowed up from their location, creating a clear reference point that the pilot could use to identify friendly forces and avoid engaging them accidentally. The insurgent forces had recognized the threat posed by approaching coalition aircraft and were attempting to disperse their forces to minimize casualties from airstrikes. But their dispersal also reduced their ability to mass for the assault that would be necessary to overrun the SEAL team's defensive positions. Hassan Mahmoud watched the orange smoke rising from the SEAL team's position and understood immediately what it meant. Coalition air power was about to be brought to bear against his forces, and the odds of his rescue were diminishing rapidly. "Your planes cannot help you forever," Hassan said, his voice betraying a confidence he might not have actually felt. "When they leave, my men will still be here." Rock had shifted his attention from the mortar crew to the insurgent assault teams that were attempting to work their way closer to the SEAL positions. His rifle spoke regularly now, each shot carefully aimed at targets that presented the greatest immediate threat to his team's survival. The distinctive sound of the A-10's twin engines could be heard approaching from the south, growing louder as the aircraft closed the distance to the target area. The Warthog's GAU-8 cannon was capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute, each round designed to destroy armored vehicles and fortified positions. "Viper 1-1, this is Hawk," Rock transmitted. "Orange smoke marks friendly positions. Targets are enemy forces approximately 100 to 300 meters north and east of smoke, multiple vehicles and dismounted infantry." The A-10 pilot acknowledged the transmission and began his attack run, diving toward the target area with engines screaming. The aircraft's distinctive silhouette was clearly visible as it approached, its twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, and its heavily armored cockpit designed to protect the pilot from ground fire. The GAU-8 cannon opened fire with a sound like the world's largest chainsaw, sending streams of depleted uranium rounds into the enemy positions at a rate that defied comprehension. The 30mm rounds tore through vehicles, equipment, and personnel with devastating effectiveness. Enemy fighters scattered in all directions as the cannon fire walked across their positions, destroying everything in its path. Vehicles exploded in balls of fire and smoke, sending debris flying hundreds of meters in all directions. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. But the A-10 pilot's attack run had exposed the aircraft to ground fire from multiple directions, and several of the insurgent fighters were armed with shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. The distinctive smoke trail of a SAM launch was visible climbing toward the aircraft as it pulled out of its attack dive. "SAM launch! SAM launch!" the pilot transmitted calmly. "Going defensive." The A-10 released chaff and flares while executing violent evasive maneuvers designed to break the missile's guidance lock. The aircraft's robust construction and redundant systems were designed to survive hits from ground fire, but surface-to-air missiles posed a serious threat even to the heavily armored Warthog. The missile missed, exploding harmlessly several hundred meters behind the aircraft as the pilot's defensive systems successfully defeated the guidance system. But the presence of SAMs in the enemy inventory significantly complicated the tactical situation for both air and ground forces. Hawk watched the airstrike results through his rifle scope, assessing the damage inflicted on enemy forces while looking for signs that the attack had eliminated the immediate threat to his team. Several enemy vehicles were burning, and the number of visible insurgent fighters had been significantly reduced. "Good hits, Viper 1-1, Hawk transmitted to the A-10 pilot. "Estimate 20-plus enemy KIA, 3 vehicles destroyed. Request additional passes on remaining targets." The pilot acknowledged but reported that his remaining fuel would allow for only one more attack run before he would be forced to return to base. Close air support was a precious commodity in Afghanistan, with more missions requesting air support than aircraft available to provide it. Breacher had used the confusion caused by the airstrike to advance even closer to his target position on the mountain road. The surviving enemy forces were too disorganized and demoralized to mount effective observation of all approaches, giving him the opportunity he needed to complete his mission. The explosive charges were emplaced with professional precision at points calculated to bring down the maximum amount of rock, while ensuring that the resulting landslide would completely block the narrow mountain road. Once detonated, the charges would trap any remaining enemy reinforcements on the far side of the obstacle. "Charges set," Breacher reported. Ready to blow on command. Ghost had moved Hassan to a more secure position where the insurgent leader would be better protected from both enemy fire and the effects of Breacher's explosive charges. Despite his value as an intelligence asset, Hassan remained a potential liability if he managed to escape during the chaos of battle. The cable restraints that secured Hassan's wrists were military-grade equipment designed to prevent escape even under extreme conditions, but the insurgent leader was testing them constantly, looking for any weakness that might allow him to slip free and attempt to reach his remaining forces. Tech had established solid communication with the extraction helicopter, which was now only 15 minutes out from their position. The pilot had been briefed on the tactical situation and was prepared to conduct a combat extraction under fire if necessary. Extract is 15 minutes out, Tech reported. Pilot confirms he can handle hot LZ extraction, but he'll need covering fire and smoke for concealment. The A-10 made its final attack run, concentrating its fire on the remaining enemy vehicles and the suspected location of the mortar crew that had been harassing the SEAL team. The pilot's accuracy was phenomenal, placing rounds exactly where they would do the most damage to enemy capabilities. One of the enemy trucks exploded spectacularly as 30 rounds penetrated its fuel tank, creating a fireball that rose over 100 feet into the air. The explosion was so violent that debris rained down across a wide area, forcing everyone to seek cover from falling metal fragments. Viper 11 is Winchester and bingo fuel, the pilot reported, indicating that he had expended all his ammunition and was running low on fuel. Good hunting ground, team. See you back at the ranch. The A-10 waggled its wings as it departed the target area, leaving the SEAL team to deal with whatever enemy forces had survived the devastating air attack. The immediate threat had been significantly reduced, but intelligence reports suggested that additional insurgent forces were still moving toward their position. Overwatch maintained his surveillance of the surrounding terrain, looking for signs of surviving enemy forces or approaching reinforcements that might threaten the team's extraction. His elevated position provided excellent observation, but it also made him vulnerable to counterattack if enemy forces managed to reach his location. I see approximately 15 enemy survivors regrouping near the destroyed vehicles, Overwatch reported. They appear to be attempting to establish defensive positions, probably hoping to interdict our extraction. Rockhead shifted his position to get a better angle on the surviving enemy forces, using the terrain to mask his movement while maintaining his ability to engage targets effectively. His ammunition supply was running low, forcing him to be even more selective about his targets. Hassan Mahmoud had been silent during the air attack, but now he began speaking again with renewed confidence. "You have won this battle," he admitted, "but there will be others. My organization is larger than you know, and my death will only make them stronger." Ghost's response was characteristically direct. "Then we'll just have to make sure you stay alive long enough to tell us how to find them," he replied, adjusting Hassan's restraints to ensure they remained secure. The extraction helicopter could be heard approaching from the south, its rotor beat echoing off the mountain walls as the pilot navigated the challenging terrain at low altitude to avoid detection by enemy forces. The aircraft was a special operations variant specifically designed for combat extractions in hostile territory. Breacher's finger hovered over the detonator for his explosive charges, ready to seal the mountain road at the first sign that enemy reinforcements were approaching the extraction site. The timing would be critical. Too early and the explosions might interfere with the helicopter's approach. Too late and enemy forces might reach positions where they could engage the aircraft effectively. Tech prepared his equipment for rapid extraction, ensuring that sensitive communication gear would be either retrieved or destroyed to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Standard operating procedures required that no equipment of intelligence value be left behind during emergency extractions. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder as the aircraft closed the final distance to the extraction site. In a few minutes, the SEAL team would either be safely aboard the aircraft heading home, or they would be fighting for their lives as enemy forces attempted to prevent their escape. Hassan Mahmoud looked up at the sky, listening to the approaching helicopter with an expression that mixed resignation with calculation. Even in custody, his mind was working, analyzing the situation and looking for opportunities that might yet allow him to escape or turn the tables on his captors. The battle for Hassan Mahmoud was entering its final phase, but the most dangerous moments often came when victory seemed within reach. The next few minutes would determine whether the SEAL team's mission would be recorded as a successful capture operation or as a tragic loss of elite American warriors in the mountains of Afghanistan. The extraction helicopter appeared over the ridgeline like a mechanical angel of salvation, its rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust and debris as the pilot maneuvered toward the improvised landing zone. The aircraft was a MH-60 Blackhawk specially modified for special operations missions, its hull bristling with defensive systems and heavy machine guns. Extract inbound, 90 seconds to touchdown, the pilot transmitted over the radio. His voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who had conducted dozens of combat extractions in similar conditions, but even experienced pilots felt their pulse quicken when flying into active combat zones. The surviving enemy forces recognized the helicopter as their last chance to prevent Hassan Mahmoud's capture from becoming permanent. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions as insurgent fighters attempted to bring down the aircraft before it could land and extract the SEAL team. Hawk coordinated his team's movements with practiced efficiency, ensuring that each man knew his role in the extraction sequence while maintaining defensive fire against the remaining enemy forces. The helicopter would be on the ground for less than 60 seconds, barely enough time to load Hassan and 6 SEAL operators before departing. Ghost lifted Hassan Mahmoud to his feet and began moving toward the designated pickup point, keeping the insurgent leader between himself and the most likely sources of enemy fire. Hassan's expensive suit was now completely ruined, torn and stained with blood and dirt, but his eyes remained alert and calculating. "You think this helicopter will save you," Hassan said as they moved across the rocky terrain. "But my people have many ways to reach the sky." As if summoned by his words, the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade cut through the air, followed by the bright flash of its motor as the warhead streaked toward the approaching helicopter. The pilot saw the incoming missile and threw his aircraft into a violent, evasive maneuver that would have challenged even an experienced aerobatics pilot. The RPG missed the helicopter by mere meters, exploding against the mountainside in a shower of rock fragments and twisted metal. The pilot maintained control despite the severe maneuvering, bringing his aircraft back toward the landing zone, while his door gunners returned fire with heavy machine guns. Taking fire from multiple positions, the pilot reported with typical military understatement, "I can hold the LZ for 60 seconds maximum before fuel and ammunition concerns require departure." Rock had positioned himself to provide covering fire for the extraction, his rifle speaking regularly as he engaged enemy fighters who were attempting to close distance with the landing zone. Each shot was carefully aimed and deliberately fired, his years of combat experience allowing him to remain calm and accurate despite the chaos surrounding them. Breacher's explosive charges detonated with a thunderous roar that shook the entire mountainside. The carefully placed charges had achieved their intended effect, bringing down several tons of rock and completely blocking the narrow mountain road. Any enemy reinforcements would now have to approach on foot across extremely difficult terrain. The landslide had an unexpected secondary effect. The falling rocks dislodged a much larger section of the mountainside, creating an avalanche that cascaded down toward the valley below. The sound was tremendous, like the earth itself was screaming as thousands of tons of rock and debris thundered down the slope. Tech had gathered his essential equipment and destroyed the sensitive items that could not be safely extracted, using thermite grenades to render the electronic components into useless slag. The destruction of the equipment was necessary, but it also eliminated the team's ability to monitor enemy communications during their extraction. Overwatch maintained his elevated position, providing precision fire against enemy forces, while the rest of his team prepared for extraction. His role required him to be the last man to reach the helicopter, maintaining overwatch until the very last moment before sprinting to the landing zone. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and rotor wash, its engine screaming at maximum power as the pilot prepared for immediate takeoff once his passengers were aboard. The aircraft's door gunners swept the surrounding terrain with heavy machine gun fire, suppressing enemy positions and creating a protective corridor for the SEAL team. Ghost reached the helicopter first, pushing Hassan Mahmoud ahead of him, and literally throwing the insurgent leader through the open door into the aircraft's cargo compartment. Hassan landed hard on the metal floor, but Ghost was already climbing in behind him, his weapon trained on any enemy fighters who might attempt to interfere with the extraction. Hawk followed immediately, his eyes scanning the surrounding terrain for threats while his teammates moved toward the aircraft with professional speed. The extraction was proceeding according to plan, but combat operations had a way of producing unexpected complications at the worst possible moments. Rock sprinted toward the helicopter while continuing to engage targets, his rifle firing even as he ran. His movement was covered by the helicopter's door gunners, who had identified several enemy positions and were systematically engaging them with devastating effectiveness. One of the surviving insurgent fighters had managed to reach a position where he could engage the helicopter with an RPG, and the distinctive smoke trail of another rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward the aircraft. The pilot saw it coming and began evasive maneuvers, but the helicopter was committed to the landing zone and could not maneuver as aggressively as before. The RPG impacted the tail rotor assembly with a tremendous explosion, sending metal fragments flying in all directions and causing the helicopter to shudder violently. Warning lights illuminated the cockpit as the pilot fought to maintain control of his damaged aircraft. Tail rotor hit. The pilot transmitted with forced comm. "Aircraft is controllable, but we need to get out of here now." Tech reached the helicopter and dove through the door, immediately turning to provide covering fire for his remaining teammates. His equipment pack had been lightened to essential items only, but even reduced weight was precious cargo when every pound affected the damaged helicopter's performance. Breacher was moving toward the aircraft when enemy fire found him. The bullet struck his left shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to stumble. But his momentum carried him forward, and he managed to reach the helicopter's door where willing hands pulled him aboard. "Breacher is hit," Rock reported as he applied pressure to the wound. His medical training kicked in automatically, assessing the injury while continuing to engage enemy targets. The wound was serious but not immediately life-threatening if properly treated. Overwatch had begun his movement from his elevated position, bounding down the rocky slope with the speed and agility of a mountain goat. Enemy fire tracked his movement, bullets striking rocks and kicking up sprays of stone chips as he descended toward the landing zone. The helicopter pilot was fighting multiple system failures as battle damage affected the aircraft's flight controls. The tail rotor strike had damaged not just the rotor itself, but also hydraulic lines and electrical systems that were critical for controlled flight. "We've got maybe 5 minutes of flight time before this bird becomes a lawn dart," the pilot announced. "Anyone not on board in the next 30 seconds gets left behind." Overwatch reached the helicopter and dove through the door just as the pilot pulled collective and began to lift off. The aircraft rose unsteadily, its damaged tail rotor causing it to yaw uncontrollably as the pilot fought to maintain directional control. Enemy small arms fire continued to impact the aircraft as it gained altitude, but the range was increasing rapidly and the accuracy of the ground fire was decreasing correspondingly. Several rounds penetrated the helicopter's hull, but none struck critical systems or personnel. Hassan Mahmoud had been secured in the center of the cargo compartment, surrounded by SEAL operators who kept their weapons trained on him while simultaneously watching for external threats. Despite his restraints and the hopelessness of his situation, the insurgent leader's eyes remained alert and calculating. "Your helicopter is damaged," Hassan observed, his voice barely audible over the sound of the struggling engines. "Perhaps it would be wise to land and negotiate with my people." Ghost's response was to press the barrel of his sidearm against Hassan's temple. "The only negotiation involves how many pieces we deliver you in," he replied coldly. The pilot was performing miracles of airmanship to keep the damaged helicopter in the air, but everyone aboard could feel the aircraft's control responses becoming increasingly sluggish. Warning lights illuminated the cockpit like a Christmas tree as multiple systems reported failures or degraded performance. Rock had stabilized Breacher's wound and administered morphine for pain control, but the demolitions expert would need surgery to remove bullet fragments and repair damaged tissue. The medical supplies aboard the helicopter were adequate for field treatment, but not for definitive care. Tech had established communication with the forward operating base and was coordinating for immediate medical support upon their arrival. The base hospital was already preparing for incoming casualties, with surgeons standing by to provide emergency treatment. "Base, this is Extract Bird," the pilot transmitted. "We have one wounded friendly and one high-value prisoner aboard. Aircraft has sustained battle damage and may not make it back to base. Request standby SAR assets and medical team." Search and rescue helicopters were already airborne and moving toward potential crash sites along the return route. If the damaged extraction helicopter went down, SAR crews would be ready to immediately recover survivors and prisoners before enemy forces could reach the crash site. Overwatch was monitoring the surrounding terrain through the helicopter's windows, looking for signs of enemy air defenses or additional threats that might endanger their flight to safety. His sniper training had given him exceptional visual skills that were valuable even in non-combat situations. The mountain terrain below was unforgiving, rocky peaks and deep valleys that would make survival difficult even for experienced special operations personnel. A helicopter crash in this region would strand survivors in some of the most hostile terrain on Earth, surrounded by enemy forces and hundreds of miles from friendly territory. Hassan Mahmoud seemed to understand the precarious nature of their situation and was calculating how it might be turned to his advantage. Even restrained and under guard, the insurgent leader was looking for opportunities to escape, or at least ensure that his capture provided no intelligence value to coalition forces. The helicopter's airspeed was decreasing as the pilot attempted to nurse the damaged aircraft toward friendly territory. Flying slower reduced the stress on damaged components, but also increased their vulnerability to ground fire and extended their time over hostile territory. "We're losing hydraulic pressure in the primary system," the pilot reported. "Switching to backup systems, but they won't last long if we take any more hits." Enemy radio traffic intercepted before Tech's equipment was destroyed had indicated that additional insurgent forces were moving to intercept the helicopter along its expected flight path. Surface-to-air missiles and heavy machine guns were being positioned to engage the aircraft as it attempted to reach friendly airspace. Rock checked Breacher's vital signs and adjusted his medical treatment based on the patient's response to initial treatment. The morphine had eliminated most of the pain, but the wound was still bleeding despite pressure dressings, and the blood loss was becoming a concern. "Breacher is stable but needs immediate surgical intervention," Rock reported to the pilot. "ETA to base becomes critical for his survival." The pilot acknowledged but could make no promises about timing given the helicopter's mechanical condition. The aircraft was flying on determination and prayer as much as on engine power, with multiple systems operating far outside their design parameters. Hawk was coordinating with base operations to ensure that their arrival would be handled efficiently, despite the emergency conditions. The prisoner processing facility needed to be prepared for Hassan Mahmoud, while the medical team needed to be ready for immediate surgery on Breacher. Ghost maintained constant observation of Hassan Mahmoud, watching for any signs that the insurgent leader was attempting to escape from his restraints or communicate with outside forces. Even seemingly innocent actions could be signals to Confederates or attempts to compromise the security of the operation. The helicopter passed over a ridgeline that marked the boundary between contested territory and areas under coalition control. The transition was not absolute. Enemy forces regularly operated in coalition-controlled areas, but the probability of encountering organized resistance decreased significantly. "Crossing into friendly airspace," the pilot announced. "Base is 20 minutes out if this bird holds together that long." Engine temperature gauges were climbing into the red zone as the helicopter's power plants worked beyond their design limits to compensate for the damaged flight controls. The pilot was constantly adjusting power settings and control inputs to maintain stable flight, his hands never still on the collective and cyclic controls. Tech had re-established communication with base operations and was providing regular updates on the helicopter's condition and estimated time of arrival. The information allowed ground crews to prepare for emergency landing procedures and immediate medical response. Hassan Mahmoud had become increasingly quiet as they flew deeper into coalition-controlled territory. The realization that his rescue was becoming increasingly unlikely seemed to be settling over him, but his eyes still showed the calculating intelligence that had made him such an effective insurgent leader. "You have captured one man," Hassan said suddenly, breaking his silence. "But there are hundreds like me, and they will continue the fight long after I am gone." Hawk looked down at the prisoner with professional interest. "Then you'd better hope we find them before they follow your example," he replied evenly. The helicopter began a gradual descent as base operations cleared them for priority landing at the forward operating base. Emergency vehicles were already positioned along the runway, ready to provide immediate assistance if the aircraft encountered difficulties during landing. Rock prepared Breacher for immediate offloading to medical personnel, ensuring that all his equipment was ready for rapid transfer, and that the medical team would have complete information about treatment already provided. Every second would count once they reached the hospital facility. Overwatch maintained his surveillance of the surrounding area even as they approached friendly territory. Enemy forces had been known to attack coalition bases with rockets and mortars, and the arrival of a high-value prisoner might trigger such an attack if insurgent forces had advance warning. The helicopter's approach to the landing zone was anything but smooth. with the pilot fighting degraded controls and failing systems to bring the aircraft safely to the ground. The landing was hard enough to rattle everyone aboard, but the helicopter remained upright and intact. On deck, the pilot announced with obvious relief. Medical team to the aircraft immediately. Medical personnel were running toward the helicopter before the rotors had stopped turning, carrying stretchers and emergency medical equipment. Breacher was transferred to their care within minutes of landing, beginning his journey to the operating room where surgeons waited to repair his wounds. Hassan Mahmoud was removed from the aircraft under heavy guard, his restraints checked and reinforced before he was transferred to the detention facility. Intelligence officers were already preparing for the extensive interrogation that would begin as soon as medical personnel confirmed that the prisoner was physically capable of questioning. Ghost watched Hassan disappear into the detention facility, knowing that the insurgent leader's real ordeal was just beginning. The physical capture had been only the first phase of the operation. Extracting intelligence from Hassan would determine the ultimate success or failure of the mission. Tech gathered the salvageable remains of his communication equipment, knowing that every piece of hardware and every bit of recorded information might prove valuable for future operations. Even damaged equipment could provide insights into enemy capabilities and tactics. The helicopter pilot shut down his engines and began the post-flight inspection that would determine whether his aircraft could be repaired or would need to be replaced. The extent of the battle damage was impressive. The fact that they had made it back to base at all was testimony to the pilot's skill and the helicopter's robust construction. Rock accompanied Breacher to the medical facility, providing the surgeons with detailed information about the wound and the treatment that had been provided in the field. His presence also ensured continuity of care and allowed him to monitor his teammates' condition throughout the surgical procedure. Overwatch found an elevated position overlooking the base perimeter, automatically assuming Overwatch duties even in friendly territory. His sniper instincts kept him alert for threats that might not be visible to others, maintaining the vigilance that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. Hawk began the process of mission debriefing, providing initial reports to his superiors about the operation's success and the intelligence value of their prisoner. The full debriefing would take hours, but preliminary information needed to be transmitted immediately to higher headquarters. The successful capture of Hassan Mahmoud represented a significant victory for coalition forces, but everyone involved understood that it was just one battle in a much larger conflict. The war would continue, new targets would emerge, and other SEAL teams would be called upon to undertake similar missions. But for now, 6 elite warriors could take satisfaction in a mission accomplished against overwhelming odds. They had ventured deep into enemy territory, captured a high-value target, and returned safely despite facing superior numbers and taking casualties in the process. The bonds forged in combat were stronger than steel, and the shared experience of surviving impossible odds would connect these men for the rest of their lives. They had seen each other at their best and worst, had depended upon each other for survival, and had proven themselves worthy of the brotherhood they shared. Hassan Mahmoud's capture was complete, but the intelligence he possessed would soon be extracted through methods that were both legal and effective. The information he provided might save hundreds of coalition lives and lead to the disruption of insurgent networks throughout the region. The helicopter that had carried them to safety would fly again after extensive repairs, ready to support other teams on similarly dangerous missions. The pilot and crew had earned their place in the unofficial brotherhood of those who risked everything to bring warriors home from battle. In the mountains of Afghanistan, the echo of the SEAL team's SOS had been answered not by surrender, but by the courage and determination that defined America's Special Operations Forces. The sniper who had broken the silence was now a prisoner, and his secrets would soon serve the cause he had fought against. 3 weeks after the successful capture operation, the sterile walls of the forward operating base's medical facility had become as familiar to the SEAL team as their own quarters. Breacher's recovery was progressing ahead of schedule, though the doctors insisted he would need at least another month before returning to active duty status. "You look terrible," Ghost said as he entered the medical ward, carrying a cup of coffee that passed for drinkable by military standards. The comment was delivered with the dry humor that served as emotional currency among special operations personnel, a way of expressing concern without admitting to vulnerability. Breacher managed a weak smile from his hospital bed, his left arm immobilized in a complex arrangement of slings and supports that allowed the shattered shoulder to heal properly. The bullet had done more damage than initially apparent, requiring 2 separate surgeries to remove bone fragments and repair damaged nerves. "Feel worse than I look," Breacher admitted, accepting the coffee with his good hand. "But the docs say I'll be back to blowing things up in 6 weeks. Maybe less if I behave myself." Ghost pulled up a chair beside the bed, settling into the kind of comfortable silence that existed only between men who had shared combat together. Outside the window, the constant activity of the base continued. Helicopters arriving and departing, convoys forming up for patrol, and the endless cycle of military operations in a combat zone. The capture of Hassan Mahmoud had yielded intelligence beyond their most optimistic expectations. Under interrogation, the insurgent leader had revealed the locations of weapons caches, safe houses, and communication networks that intelligence analysts had been trying to identify for months. The information was already being used to plan follow-up operations across the region. "Hassan's been singing like a canary," Ghost said, bringing Breacher up to date on developments he had missed while recovering from surgery. "Turns out he knows where they're keeping those American contractors who were kidnapped last month." The kidnapping of 3 American engineers had been front-page news in the international media, but intelligence agencies had been unable to locate the hostages or identify their captors. Hassan's information had provided the breakthrough that might allow for their rescue before they were executed or sold to even more radical groups. Tech appeared in the doorway, his communication equipment noticeably absent for once. Off-duty time was precious in a combat zone, and the team made an effort to spend it together whenever possible. The bonds forged in battle were strengthened by shared experiences both dangerous and mundane. "Hawk wants to see everyone in the briefing room in 20 minutes, Tech announced. "Says we've got new mission parameters to discuss." Ghost and Tech exchanged glances that communicated more than words. New mission parameters usually meant that their brief respite from combat operations was about to end, and they would soon be back in the field facing the same deadly risks that had nearly cost Breacher his life. "What about me?" Breacher asked, though he already knew the answer. His medical condition would prevent him from participating in any field operations for at least another month, leaving the team 1 man short for whatever mission they were about to undertake. "You get to hold down the fort," Ghost replied with forced lightness. "Keep the doctors honest, and make sure they're ready for us when we get back." The medical ward had seen its share of wounded warriors over the past months, each with their own story of courage under fire and sacrifice for their brothers in arms. Breacher's presence had become something of a morale booster for other patients, his stories and humor helping them cope with their own injuries and recovery. Rock entered the ward carrying a medical chart and wearing the expression that indicated he was functioning in his capacity as the team's medic rather than as a friend visiting a wounded teammate. His dual role as both warrior and healer sometimes created conflicts, but he navigated them with the professionalism that had made him invaluable to the team. "Your latest blood work looks good," Rock reported to Breacher, reviewing the chart with the thoroughness that characterized everything he did. "Infection markers are down, and the bone healing is progressing normally. You should be cleared for light duty in 3 weeks." Light duty meant administrative work and training responsibilities, but it was a step toward returning to full operational status. For special operations personnel, being sidelined by injury was often more psychologically difficult than the physical pain of the wound itself. Overwatch had been monitoring radio traffic from his elevated position on the base's observation tower, a habit that had become second nature during his years as a sniper. Even in friendly territory, he maintained the vigilance that had kept him alive through multiple deployments in hostile environments. Lots of chatter about increased coalition activity in the northern provinces, Overwatch reported as he joined the group in the medical ward. "Sounds like Hassan's information is generating follow-up operations across multiple units." The intelligence extracted from Hassan Mahmoud was being shared with coalition partners and other U.S. units operating in the region, multiplying the impact of the SEAL team's successful capture operation. What had begun as a single mission was becoming a coordinated campaign against insurgent networks throughout Afghanistan. Hawk appeared in the doorway, his expression serious but not grim. The team leader had spent the past 3 weeks in extensive debriefings and mission planning sessions, working with intelligence analysts to develop comprehensive targeting packages based on Hassan's revelations. "Time to go, gentlemen," Hawk announced. "We've got work to do." The team members said their farewells to Breacher with the casual efficiency of professional soldiers who understood that emotional displays were a luxury they could not afford. Each man expressed his concern and support in his own way, but all understood that their wounded teammate would want them to focus on the mission rather than on his absence. The briefing room was located in the base's intelligence facility, a climate-controlled environment filled with computers, communication equipment, and large-screen displays showing satellite imagery and tactical maps. The walls were covered with photographs, charts, and organizational diagrams that tracked enemy movements and activities across the region. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base intelligence officer, was waiting for them with a presentation that had been classified at levels requiring special security clearances. Her reputation for thoroughness and accuracy had made her one of the most respected intelligence professionals in the theater of operations. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to show you cannot leave this room," Colonel Mitchell began, activating the first slide of her presentation. "The information Hassan Mahmoud provided has led us to a target that could significantly impact the insurgency's operational capabilities." The first image showed a compound located in a remote valley approximately 60 kilometers from their current position. The satellite photography revealed a complex of buildings surrounded by defensive positions and what appeared to be training facilities for insurgent fighters. "This is Camp Viper," Colonel Mitchell continued. "Hassan identified it as a major training facility where foreign fighters are indoctrinated and prepared for operations against coalition forces. Our analysts estimate that over 200 fighters have graduated from this facility in the past 6 months. The implications were staggering." Camp Viper was producing experienced insurgent fighters at an industrial scale, each one capable of conducting sophisticated operations against coalition forces. Eliminating the facility would prevent dozens of future attacks and save countless lives. Tech studied the satellite imagery with professional interest, noting the communication towers and electronic equipment that would need to be neutralized to prevent the enemy from calling for reinforcements. His expertise in communication systems made him invaluable for planning operations against technically sophisticated targets. "The facility has redundant communication systems," Tech observed. "Satellite uplinks, radio towers, and probably landline connections to external networks. We'll need to hit everything simultaneously to maintain operational security." Ghost examined the compound's defensive positions, identifying weak points that could be exploited during an assault. His experience in infiltration and close-quarters combat made him expert at finding ways through seemingly impenetrable defenses. "Guard towers at each corner, but the coverage isn't complete," Ghost noted. "There's a blind spot on the eastern approach where we could infiltrate without being detected." Rock focused on the medical facilities visible in the satellite imagery, knowing that his skills might be needed to treat wounded civilians or prisoners during the operation. The compound appeared to include a medical clinic that could be used to stabilize casualties before extraction. Overwatch studied the terrain surrounding the compound, calculating firing positions and fields of fire that would allow him to provide overwatch for the assault team. The mountainous terrain offered excellent sniper positions, but also provided cover for enemy counter-snipers. "Good overwatch positions on the ridgeline north of the compound," Overwatch reported. "Range would be approximately 800 meters, well within my effective engagement envelope." Hawk absorbed all the tactical information while considering the broader strategic implications of the mission. Camp Viper represented a significant intelligence target, but it was also heavily defended by experienced fighters who would not surrender easily. "What's the estimated enemy strength at the facility?" Hawk asked, knowing that the answer would significantly affect their mission planning and resource requirements. Colonel Mitchell activated another slide showing intelligence estimates and organizational charts. "Approximately 40 to 60 fighters at any given time, plus instructors, support personnel, and possibly high-value targets attending training sessions. Total personnel estimate is 70 to 100 individuals." The numbers were daunting for a 5-man SEAL team, even one as experienced and capable as theirs. Success would require perfect planning, flawless execution, and probably a significant amount of luck. But the potential intelligence value and operational impact made the risks worthwhile. "The mission will be conducted in 2 phases, Colonel Mitchell explained, activating a tactical map that showed approach routes and assault positions. Phase 1 involves infiltrating the compound and capturing or eliminating key personnel. Phase 2 involves destroying the facility's infrastructure and extracting with prisoners and intelligence materials. Tech was already calculating the communication requirements for coordinating such a complex operation. Multiple aircraft would be needed for insertion, extraction, and fire support, all of which required secure communication links that could be maintained throughout the mission. We'll need dedicated frequencies for air assets, ground teams, and coordination with base operations, Tech noted, plus backup systems in case primary communications are compromised. Ghost studied the compound's internal layout, identifying the buildings most likely to contain high-value targets and intelligence materials. His experience in direct action missions made him expert at prioritizing objectives during time-critical operations. The main administrative building should be our primary target, Ghost suggested. That's where we're most likely to find leadership personnel and intelligence materials that justify the risks we're taking. Rock examined the facility's medical capabilities, noting that the compound included what appeared to be a substantial medical clinic. The presence of medical facilities might indicate that wounded insurgent fighters were brought there for treatment, making it a valuable source of intelligence about enemy casualties and capabilities. Overwatch continued his analysis of the surrounding terrain, identifying not only sniper positions, but also potential escape routes that enemy fighters might use to flee the compound. His role would include preventing the escape of high-value targets, as well as providing fire support for the assault team. Multiple escape routes through the valley system, Overwatch reported. I can cover the primary routes, but secondary positions would be needed to provide complete coverage. Hawk was formulating the overall mission concept, balancing the need for intelligence gathering against the risks to his team. The absence of Breacher would require adjustments to their normal tactics, possibly necessitating additional support from other units. We'll need close air support and possibly artillery support, Hawk concluded. The target is too well defended for a direct assault without significant fire support. Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly. The SEAL team's professional assessment matched her own analysis, confirming that the mission would require substantial resources and careful coordination. But the potential payoff made the investment worthwhile. All requested support assets have been pre-approved, she confirmed. You'll have priority access to close air support, artillery, and extraction helicopters. This mission has been classified as critical to theater operations. The classification level indicated that the mission had approval from the highest levels of military command, probably including generals and possibly civilian leadership in Washington. Such high-level attention brought both resources and pressure. Failure would be noticed by people who could end careers with a single phone call. Tech was already thinking about the equipment modifications that would be needed for the mission. Operating against a facility with sophisticated communication systems would require specialized electronic warfare equipment that was not part of their standard loadout. I'll need additional electronic warfare equipment, Tech requested. Jamming devices, signal interceptors, and probably some specialized equipment for capturing their communication systems intact. Ghost considered.